Welcome back to Change Ed,
Change Ed,
the #1 educational podcast everywhere, literally everywhere. We are so excited that you tuned in and that you are deciding to spend this time podcasting with us. I am one of your hosts, Andrew Kuhn, education consultant.
Still, you're sticking with it.
County Intermediate Unit. And here with me is, yes, I am.
Apparently a host now. I got elevated. Patrice Semachek, also out of the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, and forever an educational consultant.
I will say that capital letters and lowercase letters do matter, but we're not going to get into that on today's episode. That's not what the episode is about.
Small win is a small win. I guess you're finally acknowledging the work that I put into this, so it's fine.
We have here with us today a gentleman that I met at PAIMS during our job alike meetings, and this individual has a really big job. I would say that they almost have 29 different children that they need to take care of and look out for, and also help to empower and also make sure that we are headed in a direction that really puts Pennsylvania education on the map and helps to empower and prepare our students for the future. So I would like to welcome Dr. Mark Leidy to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You are the executive director for PAIU, which is the Pennsylvania Association of Intermediate Units.
Thank goodness it's written on his screen so we could read it.
I was literally reading it on the screen. So, Mark, can you tell us, because I imagine most of our listeners are not as in tune with all of the intricate parts and all the systems that help to make education happen in PA. So what is the PAIU and what does it do?
That's a great question. I'm learning every day what PAIU is. And to be very honest with you, I continue to be even more impressed as I learn. If we go really kind of down to the foundation of it, the intermediate units are exactly what their name says. They're the intermediaries between a lot of the work that happens at state level and the individual 500 school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And the 29 intermediate units that make up the system in Pennsylvania are designed to really be a support mechanism for those individual school districts, the staff and the students in those school systems. And probably my favorite saying is, when you know one intermediate unit, you know one intermediate unit.
They're all so different.
That's so true. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's really interesting when we talk about it from like a global perspective. You would think Andrew's going to be like, oh God, here we go. We're talking about Florida again. It is so different from state to state, right? But you would think coming in as an outsider, an intermediate unit would be doing the same or similar things. And they kind of do. But like you would think systematically, they'd be a little more aligned in what they're doing and how they're doing it, even in terms of their funding. Like it's so crazy to me how different even just the 4 IUs in like our southeastern region are. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a great point. Just last week for the first time, I was in Michigan, and that was a gathering of individuals who do what I do for Pennsylvania across the country. And it was fascinating. The names of the groups and the different states, from RECEs to BOCES to education service agencies, which really is the universal name, if you will, that everybody understands. When you say education service agency, they get it. But intermediate units and RECEs and BOCES, they're all named different things in different states. But I got to tell you, from that conference last week, what was really interesting to me was that many of the thematic issues that we're dealing with, even though we name them different things, they really are the same issues across states.
That's interesting too, because even when you think about granularly, like we talk about best practices instructionally. So best practices in ELA and math and science are best practices, right? And so the idea is like we call it something different, maybe to sell more books, maybe to do whatever we're doing, but like it's really interesting to think about. We just call it something different and package it differently and see what happens.
And the role of PAIU really is this idea of advocacy, networking, and innovation. Those are the 3 mantras, if you will: advocacy, networking, and innovation. And how do we do that for intermediate units in Pennsylvania so that they can do the work that they need to do with the individual school districts?
I love that innovation is a part of it, because we can't grow if we're not innovating. I love it.
I was a former science teacher, so I love it too.
I was just about to ask you, what did you do before this?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't remember. No, I'm kidding. So I started teaching. Yeah, I started as a middle school science teacher, earth science and physical and chemistry, environmental. Loved it. I loved it, all of it, and taught, and then became a building administrator and a district office administrator. And then before this job, I was a superintendent in Mechanicsburg School District for 14 years before taking on the current role.
That's fun.
Yes.
You said Mechanicsburg, and I thought Chambersburg. I just introduced my burg, so I was like, "Oh, I student taught there. I didn't student teach at Mechanicsburg. That was a lie."
Well, the interesting thing about Chambersburg is where I started. I student taught in Chambersburg, and that's where my teaching and first administrative position was in Chambersburg.
Really? I went to Shippensburg, and that's how I got to Chambersburg.
As did I. There you go.
Really?
And now I'm on my notes.
That makes sense. The Mark Leidy building that was in Shippensburg. That makes more sense.
They tore it down.
That's you.
I'm pretty sure they tore it down.
Yeah. There were no lights. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I really appreciate that you've already got your elevator pitch down, because I felt like my first year on the job was trying to figure out how to explain to people what is my job and what do I do. And I know I got from Patrice to talk about the BOCES that you mentioned.
Everyone knows what a BOCES is.
And like, if I reference that, then you kind of get a reasonable idea of what I'm doing. And I think it's an interesting testament either to their marketing of that or to the role that they have, that it is well understood. PAIU's really started in the 70s. Is that right?
Yeah, 1971 is when the General Assembly adopted the idea, moved away from a county system of education to more of a regional system. And there were originally, I believe, 26. And then there were some Hatfield and McCoy issues, I would assume, back in the 1970s that still existed. And so the 26 became 29.
Well, you could just flip the 6, right? That was easy, right?
That's right. That's right.
Flip it on end. I would think, like you said, now you went to this conference and you saw other job alikes, but otherwise it would almost be, I would compare it to like being the governor, right? Like you're looking at this entire state and there aren't many other people that you can necessarily meet with and convene with, but you're trying to differentiate for each of your different IUs and trying to meet their needs. Mark, let me ask you about a hot button topic, which is the funding, state funding, federal funding. And, I think there's a lot of concerns, some of them factual, some of them might be less factual or more like emotional, but, concerns nonetheless. What does that look like from your lens and your position? And what do you maybe see anything coming down the line, or are you concerned about any impacts?
I would qualify myself as typically an optimist. I'm going to be a realist right now and say that we're facing a very serious issue with funding public education. And IUs in that world are a little different than school districts because IUs cannot levy taxes. So for an intermediate unit, if you think of it as, a three-legged stool, most of the revenue for most intermediate units come from fee-for-service, state government or federal government. And the problem right now with the budget impasse in Pennsylvania in particular is that because the budget has not passed, there is no state revenue flowing. And in Pennsylvania, there's no federal government revenue flowing because by law that it has to be appropriated through the state budget, the federal money. So 2 of the 3 legs of that stool has been kicked out from underneath intermediate units right now. And, my stump speech is as often as anyone will listen, I'm saying we're spending money on bank fees and interest and attorneys and law firms instead of kids. And that's ludicrous. It should not be happening.
Visually, it made me think of in magic shows when they have just the one spoke and they're spinning the plate. And now, like, instead of having it be a balanced situation, we're like running from plate to plate, trying to keep them up. And to your point, putting a lot of resources where we wouldn't normally put them just to keep all the plates up and going.
Well, executive directors and superintendents are, famous for protecting their staff and kids. And they view it as their job to make sure that, don't get too worried about this. We got this. You focus on what you're supposed to do and we'll focus on what we're supposed to do. And I think sometimes to our own detriment, they become the heroes of trying to deal with this and manage it. And the general public, I hate to say it, but I'll bet if you walked into the typical convenience store in Pennsylvania, 8 out of 10 people wouldn't even know that Pennsylvania doesn't have a state budget right now. And to me, that's a testament to our teachers and to our leaders in public education, but maybe also an issue because they should know that this is happening, and ultimately it's going to impact what we can offer to kids.
Yep.
You got me a little fired up there. Sorry.
No, it's just really disheartening. It's interesting because the work that we do heavily relies on, my job specifically heavily relies on the federal funding. And so what's aggravating is this law. Like, I know the federal funding is there. You have it sitting in your pocket, but I can't do anything because of the law that's passed. So the federal funding can't even flow through. I don't know. I'm assuming that would take like a major act for anybody to change that, because it doesn't make sense to me that if the federal funding is there, why can't it just be sent where it's supposed to be sent? Because this isn't the first time this has happened in my career. So like, is there conversation about, or lobbying, or I don't even know what to do here, but like switching that so that's not as much of an issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. And all I can say to that is that it's not like this in every other state. There are other states where the federal funds can flow separate from the state budgeting process. So it is a decision that's been made in Pennsylvania. I think that you could argue that the more pressure that you take off of the system to get the budget passed, the more it's going to elongate the process. Yeah. And so many years ago, it used to be that if the budget didn't pass, nobody got paid in state government. Well, guess what? Budget impasses didn't last real long because the staffers weren't getting paid. The legislators weren't getting paid. And
go back to that.
That was proven to be illegal through the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. So now everybody's still getting paid. And I just think the more you take those pressures off the system, the more we're going to deal with these kinds of situations moving forward. Other people have said, well, what, can't we just pass a law? It's in the Constitution. It's in the Constitution of the state of Pennsylvania that they're supposed to have a budget by June 30th. A law is not going to supersede that.
It's not that easy.
Right.
You know, that's a really interesting part of your job is to know those things, to really understand it really well and be like, this is how we decided we're going to operate here in Pennsylvania as compared to, as you said, other states who don't have that. Patrice, I imagine Florida doesn't have something like that because they're just
Florida's like a
superior
state. I don't even know. I never said it was superior. I never said that. Those words have never come out of my mouth. It is just different. It is a county-wide system, but our counties are massive and smaller than some I use. So it's interesting. That's all. When you grow up knowing one thing and then you come to a new place and it's like, what the heck is all of this? It's just very interesting. And I think the differences to Mark's point earlier are not necessarily as big as we think they are. They're just labeled differently.
Right. But sometimes those subtle differences could have a big impact. So to the point of with the blocking of the federal budget, that actually has a really big impact on how things operate. To your point, makes a lot of sense, Mark, right? If you're going to relieve all the pressure, then it's like, well, we don't ever have to figure out how to get along. Nobody has to compromise. We're just going to dig our heels in and we'll wait.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what this is going to have to be. And the longer we, just take pot shots at each other, that's not helping at all. And at the end of the day, this has to be a compromise, to use your word. And that means that pretty much everybody's going to walk away not happy with the solution, but we need to get something done. The other challenge that we have from an advocacy standpoint is that you can't push so hard to just get the job done that you end up causing issues financially for your organizations, right? Mm-hmm. So we desperately need more money for early intervention. There's no question about that. Early intervention for many of the intermediate units in the state of Pennsylvania is, as was described by one of our members, an existential threat. Yep. We're still owed well in excess of $20 million from last year for early intervention, let alone the money that's being spent right now. And as a former superintendent, I will tell you that I don't know if there's a better investment made in public education than early intervention. If we can get these children identified and meet their needs at 3 and 4 years old and then continue to support that as they go into K-12, that is so much better. Such a better system than waiting until the children get to 5, 6 years old and trying to deal with all of the issues at that time.
Yeah, because I'm going to go brain science-y, but their pathways are pretty formed by 5. And so having to undo and redo, it's just, and I don't know. Again, I don't know how informed everyone around us is about how even that little part of our brain works to make it such a big deal that it has to be something that we have to focus on. And not only from a special ed lens, like I'll get fired up here about like universal pre-K and creating equity in terms of access of information. And not everyone has access to books from an early age. And there's a ton of research about how reading to people makes a huge difference. So I think that we are doing a disservice by we don't really pay a lot of money for pre-K. We have pre-K counts and we have Head Start and we have all of these things, but that's still not creating an even playing field. So those districts that have a lower SES are not getting the funding and the tools that they need to create an even playing field for their kindergartners to begin with. Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole. It makes me really angry that we don't support our babies the way we need to.
I think any conversation about early childhood education is an important one, frankly. And I do believe that you're right in saying that they're all valuable. I will tell you that from a political lens, they're viewed differently. And yet there's not a real deep understanding of the differences between the programs. So when you talk about Head Start versus pre-K counts versus early intervention for preschool, and then infant and toddler early intervention, those are 4 very distinct programs that have different funding sources and different legal requirements associated with them.
Yeah.
What I'm specifically referring to is early intervention, which is mandated by law. And the best way to describe it to those who don't deal with it frequently is it's essentially special education for preschool children.
Yeah.
And the more we can invest there, the better off we are overall in our education system.
Totally agree. Do most IUs have an early intervention system? Is that something that all IUs have to do? Is that part of their charter or whatever?
And nobody has to. Most of the IUs do. Philadelphia, there's a group in Philadelphia named Elwyn. They run the early intervention in that area. And then in Pittsburgh, the actual school district itself runs the early intervention. And that happens a few other places in the state where individual entities will run an early intervention program. But for the most part, in Pennsylvania, it's the intermediate units that hold the contract. And those contracts are called MAWAs, which I just learned within the last year.
Oh, yeah. It's really interesting because looking at it from, I've been at an IU since 2010, so 15 years. And I was an autistic support teacher at an elementary level first. And then I became active in my union leadership. When I started learning more about just what these early intervention teachers, the psychs that are involved in it, then the OT, the PT, like all these related services, like it is such a big, and I don't think anyone realizes too, when you talk early intervention, they think, okay, it's special ed, but they don't recognize that there's speech, there's OT, there's PT, there's all of these things associated with it that cost time and money. And we're not getting the funding that we need to be able to provide those quickly and adequately.
Yeah, that's well said. And in addition to that, the other significant difference with EI, early intervention, compared to school age is what is least restrictive environment. It's the exact opposite. So just yesterday, I was visiting an IU in the central part of the state, and we were talking about EI services. They have to send the professional staff to 600 locations in just their intermediate unit because least restrictive environment for EI is in the home, which is the exact opposite of least restrictive environment for school age. And I think it's something that we need to explore a little bit, like how all of a sudden you turn 5 and magically it's more important that you're in school than you are in a home-based situation. I think that's something that we can look at closer.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
My birthday's in 3 days, so you better come to my house now because you won't be allowed to when I turn 5.
It's interesting too, because when you think about like training, that requires a very different level of training to go into someone's home versus going into someone's school. Having a master's in special education, I never got the delineation between, I can teach, I guess, birth to 12th grade or 21 or whatever it is. But like, I never got any specialized instruction on what to do for any of my jobs. That in itself costs money and time and all those things to help prepare people to do that in a way that's comfortable for them and for the families.
Agreed.
This whole conversation makes me think about the difference between being an informed consumer versus being an opinionated consumer. And really, that comes back to us on education. That's a big part of our job, is to be able to empower individuals not only to be, but to find ways to be informed when it comes to making this decision. What made me think of that, Mark, is when you were talking about the individual you spoke to who said, can't we just make a law? Now, in a lot of ways, they're pulling on some of the information they had or that they got from social studies somewhere, and they're like, we should be able to change this, which is awesome, right? Like that's the democratic process. Like, yes, we should be able to, but then how about researching it further in that opinion level conversation? And then, oh, we can't. All right, never mind. What do we do? How can we activate participation to make that difference? For me, that's a huge difference of being educated and informed, and not educated in a negative sense, like, oh, well, you're uneducated, but how do I get that education? What do I do so I know that what I'm talking about? I'm speaking from a place of confidence and solid footing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think as educators, as a profession, we invest so much of our time and energy into the students, which we should, right? That's why we exist, is
Right.
to help our children become educated. That sometimes, though, I think we forget we have to educate the public too. We have to inform the public. I've often said this discussion around school choice, and maybe it's a little bit arrogant for me to say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Like, bring it on. Like,
Right.
Because I'll put our people up against anybody you want to put out there. But if you're going to bring it on, make it fair. Level the playing field.
Yes.
Everybody plays by the same rules.
Yes.
But I'll put our teachers, I'll put our leaders up against anybody you want to produce, and we'll take it on. But we're also going to spend more money on marketing. We're going to spend more money on things that don't directly go to kids. And that's why fundamentally I have an issue with it.
Mark, I could talk to you for hours.
We have found that even within our own intermediate unit during these times, and I was recently just part of a mentoring meeting, kind of a training, and everyone in that room was talking about how, unless you're in that specific office, which there are multiple offices at the IU that do different things, student services, early intervention that we've talked about. But if you go outside the office, not many people could say, oh, that's what they do. Where when you're in a district, it's a little bit different to be like, oh, I teach sixth grade. Okay, you're a teacher and you teach that grade. So what I find interesting, though, is that as you go farther out, sometimes it's hard for people to really understand the level of advocacy that you might need in your positions. For our office, we do a lot of outward facing work. We do a lot of work with districts. We're supporting them directly and connecting with them. But then if you ever talk within our own IU, not many people are like, I know what they do, right? Or they're like, what do you do? And then, vice versa for others. It's the same scenario. So what's interesting about the intermediate unit that most might not know is that, there's a lot that happens in the intermediate unit, as you said, but a lot of it goes out. We go out into the area to support. So then when it comes to our own advocacy, we're like, I could call a couple of districts. Maybe they could vouch for me. It's almost like a hidden army that goes out and does their work. And if you do it correctly, you just blend in. It's not like, we're not wearing anything special or, standing out. We just we're one of the educators that's in this building supporting students. Normally it's not an issue, but it's kind of like right now it's like a jarring thing of like, how do I let people know that, what we do matters? Because everyone believes that. But the advocacy part is an interesting component that I didn't originally think of. When I went to Shippensburg, at the Mark Leidy building, I wasn't thinking about advocacy that way. I am now, but I wasn't then.
Yeah, just yesterday, this is outstanding conversation, because just yesterday I was introduced for the first time to what apparently is the only book that was ever written about intermediate units in Pennsylvania, and it's entitled "The Quiet Engine That Powered Pennsylvania Education," and I think it's indicative of exactly what you were just saying. That quiet engine that, let's face it, without the engine, things don't work, right?
Right.
And yet, because it's quiet by definition, it's tough for a lot of people to know. I have nieces and nephews, and when I'd say I was a principal or a superintendent, they all knew exactly what I was talking about. But when I said I became the executive director of PAIU, they're like, what? Like, what is PAIU? What is an IU?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these are kids that went through our education system, right? And so I agree with you completely that most people don't understand what intermediate units do as that quiet engine.
I love that title, and I'm going to steal it anytime I'm talking about it because that's phenomenal. I didn't know about an IU until I was in grad school, and my friend Rachel, whose mom worked for an IU, was like, hey, there's an opening here for this job. And I didn't even know that they existed, let alone like what they do. And then I just assumed it was a whole lot of special ed teachers and we were doing things, putting kids in different classrooms and things like that. And then I found out about this role. Like it's crazy how it just keeps unraveling.
Yeah. If it happens in education, it happens in IUs, right? And it's not in every IU and it's not at the same level, but if you can find it somewhere in the world of K-12 education, you can find it somewhere in an intermediate unit.
I could 100% see a family holiday get together and they're like, Uncle Mark's lost it. He's just making up letters. I don't even think he does anything, right? He just put PA in front of it and to make us believe that that is a thing.
Does he just mean AI, like artificial intelligence? Like where's the P and the U come from?
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Having this conversation and you being so transparent about it is really meaningful, I think, to our listeners, for them to be like, oh, okay. And also to inform, right? If you're not in education, like you said, you might not be aware of necessarily what's going on because the impact might be different. So to be able to share, and I think that would help to keep that pressure on that we talked about, that our elected politicians need to know that we are paying attention and that we care.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think that leadership, if we didn't have issues or problems or crises, you wouldn't need leadership, right? And so as a leader, it's our responsibility to be out there and looking for solutions as best we can to make sure that the people that are doing the good work every day can continue to do that work and have the resources to make it happen.
I tell Patrice all the time, that's why I'm such a good leader. And then she tells me nobody's following me. So you can't lead if nobody's following you.
Well, I will tell you, you're not going to insult me with any questions or put me on a spot. I'm used to it. And if I'm not comfortable with the question, I'll tell you that it's probably better you talk to somebody else about that. So.
That is also the sign of a good leader. It is the sign of a good leader. The one said, I don't know, and I'm not the one.
I'm not your guy, right? I don't think. Mark, we really appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time to meet with us. We are very excited to have you at the helm of PAIU, whether it's an IU organization or does something with education. Whatever your family argument ends up with, we'd love to find out. But we appreciate you stopping by. We would like to offer to you the second to last final thought. I want to give you the floor to send us off, and then maybe someone will also send us off.
Maybe someone. Definitely someone needs to have the last word.
It's leadership.
Now, I'll do a little maybe quick history lesson, even though I was a science teacher. We're coming up on the 250th year of our country. And in the state of Pennsylvania, it's pretty special. When you look back at the history of public education, Pennsylvania was really one of the first large governments to accept this idea that every child should be educated. And one of my good friends that I've come to know here recently in the IU world gave me a book called Meditations from Marcus Aurelius. And one of the meditations in the book says that for education, you should spend lavishly. And we don't necessarily think of the word lavishly when we think of how we spend on education. So as we celebrate the 250th year of our country and the fact that Pennsylvania is a leader in public education, I would just encourage all of us to continue to promote this idea, the importance of the resources that we need.
That's huge.
Wow. And the tie into the whole conversation.
Anything else, Andrew? Let's not ruin it.
Okay. Well, then I'll just encourage our listeners to send this to. It's not nice. It hurts my feelings. I was trying. I would encourage our listeners to send this podcast to their politicians so they can hear that we should be spending lavishly on education. What struck me about what you were saying, Mark, was that coming up on the 250th, that Pennsylvania IUs have only been around for a fifth of the country's history. So we're still new to the game, but building and making that impact. And the quiet engine sticks with me. It made me think of it. We're like an electric vehicle. Not making any noise, but we're making it go. We're making it work.
Maybe slowly, since it's an electric vehicle. It can't tug too much at one time.
We have limited miles, right? We can go about 200 miles.
Love it. I love it.
Be sure to like and subscribe and share this and all of our podcasts, but especially this one, with all the people who are leaders and in positions to make a difference and help students grow into their full potential.
See, you just had to, you couldn't let
And
Mark
spend
in.
lavishly on education. All right, Patrice, what do you got?
I've been carrying this the whole time.
Oh, here we go.
Doing?
Here we go. My gosh.
Sorry.